Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
Good.
I'm really excited to have all of you here. I'm Madeleine Garcia. I'm the city's digital engagement officer. I work here on the 9th floor. This is our second partnership with Civic Group in Oakland to bring some featured speakers from the community to talk about issues that we're facing in the community, and also give us an opportunity to connect with each other, meet, and discuss things of high interest. I want to introduce Madeleine Bair. Over there, she's our featured speaker. She's a journalist and a media developer with a background in public radio, human rights, and documentary film. She was super phenomenal. We met at Modern Coffee, and she says, I have this incredible research that I've been doing on Oakland's Latino immigrants. And I said, well, that's great. I feel like everybody in the city really needs to hear about it, so maybe we should create a forum to talk about it so you can present your work. She's actually born and raised in Oakland. She started her career at 8 years old, working for a media youth lab. And without further ado, I'm going to not so gracefully swap out the slideshow so that Madeleine can start her presentation.
The research I will be presenting this morning really involved the input and collaboration of so many individuals and organizations throughout the city, many of whom are in the room. And so it's always been important to make sure that it gets back to community stakeholders who can really use it and build on it in their own work. So I really appreciate this opportunity to do that here at City Hall. As Madeleine said, I'm going to try to be short so that we can have a rich discussion and Q&A afterwards and really hear from the collective expertise right here in the room. So, I want to start by posing this question to you. If each of you can just take a moment to think to yourself. I know people are here from many city departments, maybe community organizations. What are the reasons that you have to engage with your constituents or community members? Close your eyes if that's helpful. Just think about that. When might you need to reach out to community members? I don't know if anyone wants to volunteer one reason they come up with. Yeah?
One of the reasons you need to engage with your constituents is you can't help them if you don't know what their problem is.
Right, so you need to hear from them. You need to have kind of a two-way communication to really make sure that you understand what their concerns are. What else?
I want to bring them on board as employees.
Sure, yeah, bring folks on board. Yeah?
Find ways to help them.
Find ways to help them. So you need to really communicate to be able to understand what their needs are, how you can help. Yeah?
A lot of the things that we do will affect them, so it's good to ask how things are going.
Right, otherwise we're kind of working blindly.
Yeah.
So,
Finding ways to let them know about the services that we do offer.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Share new services, share resources, maybe share information about an event you want folks to participate in. So there are many reasons that we all have to communicate and engage with community members. That's true of many of you as public servants. It's also true of myself as a journalist. Both of the work of all of us, it really involves having effective communication and engagement to both hear from our residents and impart information to them. And in an ideal world, we would be communicating effectively with all of our residents. When a city council member holds a town hall, the audience would reflect the diversity of the community that he or she represents. When the city sends out an alert about toxic air quality, it would get out to all residents who are impacted by that. But we all know that this is not necessarily true. So what I'm going to talk about today is many communities face barriers to both getting information and getting their voices heard. So how can we, as public servants, as journalists, as anyone who's really engaged in communicating with the community, How can we identify those barriers and address them to make sure that we're serving the diversity of our community and really involving the input of all of our diverse residents? Specifically, the research that I'll be talking about focused on Latino, immigrant, and Mam Indigenous communities. But the barriers that these communities face are also applicable to many other communities that you may work with, other immigrant communities, the elderly, homeless populations. So I invite you to also think about how what we're discussing today might apply to working with other communities who face similar barriers. So, as many of you may know, Latino immigrants are the fastest growing community in Oakland. About 1 in 5 Oakland residents speak Spanish at home. That is a population that has grown by about 20% since the year 2000. Fruitvale is often thought of as being and has been the commercial and civic center of this community, but today half of all of East Oakland speak Spanish at home. And there's a growing number of immigrants from Guatemala who speak neither Spanish nor English, but the Mam Indigenous language. So when I returned to Oakland a few years ago as a journalist, I wondered, where are their stories in local media? If this community represents so much of our city, where are their voices in civic conversations? And also, how are they getting news and information on issues that impact them? I developed El Tímpano as a way to really pursue this question and develop creative solutions to address what we find. And so with a small team, we set out to do an information ecosystem assessment. We wanted to hear directly from residents. Where do you get news and information on issues that impact you? How do you engage in civic conversations? And where do you see gaps and opportunities to do better? I want to be clear, this was community-based participatory research. So it really acknowledged and relied upon the expertise within the community. And I want to acknowledge some of the people here who played a role in that. Henry Salas, who I met through Pete Villasenor, both of them of the Oakland Public Libraries. Henry really helped with doing outreach among the Mam community. Pete also provided his expertise as being the branch manager and provided a lot of support to help us reach out to residents. We focused on monolingual Spanish and Mam-speaking residents because, again, these are growing communities, and also we know that language for them is itself such a significant barrier to getting information and making their voices heard. So what the research entailed, we spoke with about 24 community leaders and connectors. So I'm talking about educators, church pastors, librarians, community organizers, directors of community health clinics, folks who are from and work directly with this community, to really understand from them what are ways that your community gets news and information, what are the challenges that you see and opportunities to do better. We also spoke directly with more than 300 residents. We did that in 2 different ways. We created surveys, which were very short and engaging, asking residents what issues are important to you and where do you go to get news and information on those issues. We took this survey to libraries, to churches, to street festivals, and people sat down right then and there and filled them out and oftentimes stayed to engage in a longer conversation about this topic. We also partnered with several community organizations to facilitate a series of workshops so that we could have more in-depth discussions with residents on these issues. And this is a photo from one of those workshops we did in collaboration with Mujeres Unidas y Activas. And then I also spent a lot of time going to community forums, town halls, meetings, to simply observe how Latino immigrants are incorporated into those sorts of civic conversations and how they're left out. And so this was really a 9-month deep listening process. All of what we heard is compiled in a report, which there are some copies here. If you haven't grabbed one, you can also view and download the full report at this link. And we also have some executive summaries in Spanish and English here. Overall, what we found is that due to many barriers, Latino immigrants often do not have the information they need or are able to give input on issues that are impacting them. And I want to share just a few quotes from residents and community leaders we talked to. So this is what someone said at a workshop we led. Much of the community is not informed. That's why abuses occur. The pastor of a church in East Oakland told us there are many people who have a lot to say, but they don't have the opportunity to say it. So I want to break down what we heard into 2 pieces that I think may be particularly relevant to you and your work. One is the different layers of barriers that we identified that Latino and Mam immigrants face in getting the information they need and making their voices heard. And then opportunities, some of the creative approaches that are being used by a number of community organizations and individuals to address those barriers. So the first barrier is, no surprise, language, particularly since we were targeting immigrants who don't speak English fluently. But I want to talk about exactly how language does provide a barrier to getting information and engaging in civic conversations. There are lots of events, for example, that are held to solicit the input of residents. Some events even target Latino immigrant communities, and invitations to those events are not in the languages they speak themselves. Sometimes the invitations say that Spanish translation will be available, but if the invitation itself is not in Spanish, then that's not necessarily getting to this community. I also heard from a number of community advocates who told me they often receive information from city agencies asking them to share that information with the residents that they work with, but the information itself is only in English. And so for under-resourced organizations, it's quite a burden to ask them or expect them to do that translation themselves or to go back to the city to ask for a translation. So those are a few ways that residents and community leaders told us that language is really a barrier. But just because something is translated doesn't mean that it will necessarily reach these communities. So this was another big barrier that we found, is distinct communication channels. And what I mean by that is, where do you go to for news and information? What sources and platforms do you use? For many of you here, that might be Twitter or the radio or email newsletters that you subscribe to. We asked residents this question, and we asked both in the surveys and in the community workshops that we facilitated. This is an activity that we did in the workshops called Donde Consigo Información, where we gave people different colored stickers to indicate how frequently they go to different sources for news and information. Everything from websites to newspapers, television, community organizations, churches. And this is just from one workshop. It doesn't necessarily represent all of what we heard from residents. But I can tell you where people do not go to for news and information. Twitter, email addresses, or email newsletters, newspapers. And these are some of the sources that a lot of community organizations, city agencies, and officials rely on to share information, to share updates, to share event invitations to their constituents. And so if they're only relying on these certain platforms and sources to get the word out, then they're not reaching a whole swath of the community. And I'll talk in just a bit about where residents told us they do go to for news and information. Another barrier, particularly in the Trump administration, there's widespread fear and concern among many immigrant communities. And so what this means is, for example, if you're organizing a community meeting and you have it at a site that residents don't necessarily know or don't trust, or if your organization is one that people aren't familiar with, people are less likely to attend that meeting. This is another big challenge, is in Oakland today, there is no timely source of news and information in Spanish. There is Spanish language television and radio stations, but those cover the entire 9-county metropolitan Bay Area. So there's a very limited amount of local news and information that they can share on any one particular municipality. And this creates a big challenge for people who are trying to get out news and information to this community. I'll just share one example. I went to a town hall that was soliciting the input of residents from across Oakland on the new downtown plan. And there was a Cantonese interpreter, a Mandarin interpreter, a Korean interpreter, and no Spanish language interpreter. And that's because no one had expressed interest and a need for a Spanish language interpreter. And so I asked the organizers, how did you try to get this out to the Latino immigrant community? And they said, we really struggled. We sent information to a few grassroots organizations, but we never heard back. And so you can imagine how that might be different if there were even a Facebook page or a website or some news outlet that was specifically targeting this community to share information about events like that. And finally, education levels. So in East Oakland, 35 to 45% of residents don't have a high school degree. That number would be significantly larger if it were just talking about the Latino immigrant residents. There are relatively high rates of illiteracy among Latino immigrants, especially among Mam immigrants. And what this means is that a lot of residents may be very engaged, may really want to understand policies, may want to know how to take action on particular issues. But oftentimes, the information that's put out assumes a prior level of understanding and of knowledge and of literacy. This was one quote we heard from a community advocate who said, "The news isn't designed for people who aren't already in the know." And she said, just simplifying the language could go a long way. So now I want to highlight some of the creative ways that community leaders and organizations are working to address some of these barriers. And then I'd love to hear maybe other examples that you have. Really, all of these approaches use this ethos, is meet people where they're at. So I talked about where people don't necessarily go to find news and information, but where do they go to? What ranked high on our surveys was Spanish language television and radio, Facebook, and a variety of trusted community organizations, so churches, libraries, and other grassroots organizations. So partnering with these organizations is a great way to meet this community. One example that a community leader gave me is when he was doing outreach for an event they were holding, he made sure to put information about that event in a church bulletin. And then he spoke at a pulpit during Sunday service. A number of churches welcome community organizations and agencies to table after service to share information with their congregants. Libraries as well, as we all know, are a jewel of our community, and also often welcome agencies and organizations to set up a table in their lobby and impart information to their patrons. I actually spent several Saturday afternoons doing just that. As we were serving people, I sat in the lobby of the Cesar Chavez Library. Thank you, Pete. And I noticed not just what a community center that library is, but also what a resource that the bulletin board itself in the library is. Many patrons would stop and spend 5 minutes just viewing the bulletin board, which I think we have a picture of here, where there are flyers about different events, about how to sign up for CalFresh, about where to find the mobile food bank. And so that was clearly a resource for news and information for a lot of people in this community. And then churches. There are several grassroots organizations. Oakland Community Organizations works with congregants of different churches throughout Oakland. And so I sat in on a number of the meetings that they had in church basements or church-affiliated schools where I saw city council members respond to concerns of the community members who were there. I saw members of the Department of Transportation break down plans for a street improvement project and how it might affect that neighborhood, and they were able to address residents' questions and concerns right there. So doing that, going to meetings that people are already having and spaces they already trust would be much more effective than if they tried to set up their own meeting in their own space and expect people to come to them. And finally, I want to just spend a few minutes talking about the specific needs of the Mam Indigenous community. I've yet to find reliable data on the numbers of this community, but anyone living or working in East Oakland has seen the growth of this community over the past decade. And I want to note that while this research refers to looking at the information needs of Oakland's Latino immigrants, many Mam immigrants don't identify as Latino, but as Mam Indigenous. And this community faces all of the barriers that I've talked about and more. There are many people who don't speak Spanish or English. There are higher rates of illiteracy because many people received only a few years of that, of education. And one gentleman I talked to, a Mam gentleman I talked to at a church, I asked him, how do your family members who don't speak Spanish or English, how do they get information about their community? And he said, no se informan. They're uninformed. There's essentially no information for that community that's local and in their language. But I do want to highlight one great example from the Cesar Chavez Library about how they reached out to this community. And I'll actually just hand it to Pete to talk about this.
Hi everybody, I'm the branch manager at Chavez. Good morning. So Henry Salas, who's sitting right next to me, who's going to be shown in that video, is helped me out a lot because I found out at Chavez Library we were getting a lot of Mam speakers that were coming to the library that really couldn't speak that much Spanish. There were a few times when they spoke more English than Spanish. So, but I was in a quandary because I really didn't have many resources to turn to or anything written in their indigenous language. And then Henry started volunteering at the library many years ago, and then we were lucky enough to hire him as a library aide, and I asked if he wouldn't mind recording a video about the library services in his language, because he's also from Guatemala. And so what you're going to hear is a really short video of the Oakland Public Library library services in the language of Mam. And this is a beautiful video because when Mam families will come and get their library cards, and I'm trying to explain to them all the benefits of having the card, I can tell, especially the parents have this quizzical look in their face, they're not really getting it, so that's when I turn to this video that's on our library Facebook page, and what I do is I play for my patrons, so you'll see. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. Now I feel horrible. This is just a screenshot.
Oh,
but
no. You know what? You don't need a Facebook profile. Just go to our Facebook page, Cesar Chavez Library Facebook. Click on videos, and you'll see that video. I know it's a great video. All right.
We'll move to Q&A in just a second. Thank you, Pete. And so this, it relies on the assets within the community relies on having mom staffers and volunteers. It uses a platform that residents actually use. So I think it's a great example of communicating with this particular community that faces a lot of barriers. With that, that's pretty much all that I wanted to share with you. Actually, there's a lot more, but it's a Friday morning. There's a lot more in our report. To learn more about El Tímpano, you could visit our website. We're right now planning our second pilot project, which will launch next month, and it will be a weekly text message-based participatory news bulletin in Spanish. So I'd be happy to talk with any of you. After that, we're looking for different community partners as well. I know there are many of you here who have been working on this issue for many years. I'd love to hear your insights and reflections, examples that you may have that weren't previously brought up. Otherwise, I'd love to hear from you how you might apply kind of this research in the work that you do. And I'm happy to answer any questions. So thank you.
So I was actually inspired by that little video thing. With the work that we do, work with the Mam community at least once or twice a year. And Oakland tonight, this CRSN, the homicide program. So for some reason, this community is being impacted by homicides in the city of Oakland. And that's a beautiful way of, I have, besides the language barrier issues, I have noticed that they don't always understand what kind of support they can get from what's called CAL-VCB, the Victims of Crime Agency. And this video would be, in their language, would be a beautiful way to explain the whole process to them.
Great, thank you. I actually want to mention, for other folks who want to reach specifically the Mam immigrant community, Henry is organizing the next Mam Cultural Festival, which will take place Saturday, May 11th at the Cesar Chavez Library.
No, it's on the Cesar Chavez Education Center.
So in Fruitvale.
It's on International 28. I think I wrote down the
On 2825 International Boulevard. So that's on May 11th. Again, meeting people where they're at. This is a festival of and for the Mam community. So talk to Henry afterwards if you want to learn more, be a part of that. Yeah.
I will add on to that was Estrella Victor from Catholic Charities in the East Bay. I am John Torres with Youth Alive, and we partner on this homicide response. And just to add to some of the urgency, this is great information. I think that's a great idea that you're talking about. So let's move some stuff and pull in Henry on some things, right? The urgency for me is just in the span of 2014, the homicide rate, or the homicides were maybe about 2% were impacting the immigrant population. Last year it was 28%.
Wow.
So there's a big growth into what Estrella is saying, that as the growth in this immigrant population, a lot of which are Mam speaking, it's definitely some other cultural things that beyond even just in how to communicate,
Right.
that I think needs to be understood to try to have it. But that's another piece of the urgency that we deal with on a daily basis.
28% of all of the homicide victims were Mam?
Or immigrant. So I can't say they're all,
Okay.
yeah, so sprinkled in there, but again, it's been a growth between 2% in 2014 and then in 2018 now it's up to 28%.
Wow. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a clarifying question, to make sure I heard you right. Did you say that half of East Oakland speaks Spanish?
At home. At home, yeah.
Oh, okay. at home. And then also, you said Latino immigrants don't read Twitter, email newsletters, and there was a third one.
Newspapers also scored really low. So
Okay.
this was based on the responses to the surveys that we conducted. So surveys from 250 people and workshops with another 50 or so people. That's what we heard, is that Twitter, email addresses. I think in our original survey we also included Nextdoor, but then kind of no one else checked that, so that also scores very low. Yeah.
But I did see that you had WhatsApp on there.
Yeah, that didn't score very high. I think. Yeah. I mean, I don't want you to read too much into just this visual because, again, it's only one workshop representing the people here. You know, and it's a workshop that we conducted in collaboration with a community organization. So, for that respect, most people had a good relationship with community organizations. Yeah, you know, a lot of people said they use Facebook, but also they realized that they can't necessarily trust what they see on Facebook. So there's a lot more nuance that we got out of the conversations that we had, and there's more around that in the full report.
Okay, just one last question.
Mhm.
When and where did this take place?
So this was from the fall of, kind of the summer of 2017 until last summer.
In
Yeah.
East Oakland?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Like in the Fruitville or?
Really all across East Oakland.
All
Yeah.
across. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not from Oakland, I just recently moved here, but
Welcome.
I did a lot of community work in Orange County. And one of the ways that we reached out to monolingual residents and some of the other ethnic, because we had a lot of people from indigenous Mexican tribes. So we went to ethnic grocery stores, schools, soccer fields. We also went to food distribution centers, and more than anything, we engaged people from those communities to become part of our community agency and become a peer educator. So I had one lady from Guatemala who was illiterate, she didn't know how to read or write, but she also did a lot of surveys. And she said, well, how can I do the surveys? I just gave her a little piece of paper and just tally. Here's this, and I put visuals on there for her. So you're gonna put a little stick every time you talk to people about this. You know, and then you're gonna turn that clipboard over and let them sign their name, you know. So that was a way for us to really engage the community and get information out to them. And we also worked with a partnership with the churches through Catholic Charities, the schools, and our organization. So we actually went out and said, we need to partner with you to get this information out to people.
Great. I'm sorry, what's your name?
My name is Bair Morales. I actually work as an HR analyst for the city, but I did a lot of community work in Orange County.
Great. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, for the first pilot that we did with El Tímpano, we created a community microphone, which was a physical microphone, which had a pretty outrageous origami sculpture surrounding it. And we took that to different locations, like what you're mentioning. We took it outside of Las Cardenas grocery store next to a churro stand. We took it to schools. Again, just thinking of places where folks gather and connect is a great way to reach that community. Anyone else? Yeah.
With your discussions in the community, what have you, was there like maybe a desire to have more like ESL classes in the community? Because what I have found in the past is that the classes themselves could be a place where information can be given out, especially if we have ESL classes that diverse, then they themselves can bring out information. So I was wondering if that came up, about maybe ESL classes availability, or was there a desire for that?
Yeah, I believe that came up, and there are a number of different ESL classes that are offered, many through churches, and again, that was another place that we went to survey people. Yeah, I'm not sure if anyone else has anything else to share. It's not something that we asked people specifically, but when we did ask people what is the sort of information and news that you want, what would be empowering local media for you, what we heard was that people want basic information about resources and services that they can access, really information to help them make decisions and take actions in their daily lives. So services was definitely one, essentially like when and how can I sign my child up for youth programs? How can I access medical services? So certainly I think ESL classes would fall into that. Thank you. Yeah.
Can you talk about people's perception about schools? I feel like it didn't get highlighted in your presentation, and like, to me that seems like a big resource.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Schools are definitely another one of those trusted community institutions that we heard people go to. A lot of schools have parent groups that are strong, that are another great way to connect with immigrants. I also heard a lot of great insight from educators and people who work at schools who shared, for instance, that text messaging is one way that they share information with their parents because, again, not everyone reads their emails, not everyone will go to your website, but pretty much everyone has a phone. So a lot of schools use text messaging as a way to reach their parent community. Yeah?
How much support, if any, did you get from the city in terms of what you're doing?
The city brought you all together here today, so thank you.
Talking about prior, when you started.
Yeah, no, we haven't gotten support from the city. This research was supported by a seed grant from another organization. So if any of you work for the city or another organization that you think would like to partner or give us funds, I would love to talk with you. But thus far, no, we haven't actually developed a partnership with the city or received funding from the city at all.
Did you approach them, as it was beginning?
No, I did not. Yeah.
I think they're more receptive now.
I would hope so. Yeah. Thank you. I like where this is going. Anyone else? Yeah.
What are you doing going forward? Could you speak a little bit more to that?
Sure. So this research, we did this all to both provide valuable insight for everyone who, like all of you, who are working to engage this community, to really share that sort of insight and data. We also did it to inform the design of a local new Spanish language news service. And so we launched one pilot project last spring that involved a physical community microphone. Right now we're working to launch a second pilot, which we've got a little bit of funding and support for, which will launch next month. And so we'll be doing a lot of community outreach. If you work for organizations that provide services or resources and you want to get that out to the community, I'd love to talk with you because we're looking for different partners and community experts. And essentially, again, that will be something that people sign up for. Throughout all of this work, as we've been talking to residents, we've invited residents to share their phone numbers if they want to be involved in El Tímpano moving forward. And so we already have a list of a few hundred subscribers who will receive text message and be able to respond with their own questions and stories and concerns on different issues. So we're looking to launch and evaluate that pilot and to build on the first pilot we did and to raise funds.
I think we have time for one more question, so we want to make sure we have time for the community and action pitches. So we have one more question, Madeleine.
Were you able to find a certified mom interpreter at all that maybe we could refer, if we need that service? Because we do have equal access program at the city, so I was just wondering if you would have resourcing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was fortunate enough to involve Henry Salas to really help us with outreach to the mom community. Henry, you're a mom interpreter, correct?
Yes.
So maybe you could address that question of the availability of mom interpreters in the community.
So there isn't a lot. So I work with the immigration, and I travel a lot to a lot of states. And there's only 5 official certified moms, including me, in the entire nation. So what we did on December 15th, for me at Susan Chavez, so I had a workshop. So I was talking about that, but there were like 25 moms who came, from ages 16 to. So I had the workshop, and I was talking about how could they apply, since everything now is online. So most of them, they don't know how to like you mentioned right there, use emails. So I was trying to help them to create a resume. And so again, there isn't a lot of them, but I hope, with the agents that I work, I hope they can get more certified interpreters. But if you want to follow up with this question afterwards.
Well, thanks to everyone for your great questions and for coming to listen and learn. And thanks to Madeleine for an awesome presentation. I feel like it's opened a lot of interesting